10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 407. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 407 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you're all doing well out there and hope you're ready to dive into another episode about this little vocabulary concept. I got a bunch of messages from you that you really enjoyed the first episode, so I'm super excited to keep this thing going. So, we're not really going to do anything different this week. We're just going to pick another piece of vocabulary and run it across all the changes in Donna Lee. I think that that's the best practice for now. And then maybe later on a subsequent episode, we could talk about some of the other stuff that we can do with this. But I think just building our stable of vocabulary, if you've never done this before, is the way to go and is where you're going to see the biggest amount of benefit. It's quite a relief to work on these little short pieces of vocabulary rather than multi-measure pieces of vocabulary that are really hard to, first of all, remember, and then second of all, get out of your instrument when you're in the heat of the moment and you are trying to put together a solo using vocabulary that you have under your fingers, in your brain, in your ears. So it should be a pretty quick episode. The first thing I want to do is I want to point out where this piece of vocabulary comes from in the melody of Donna Lee. Because remember, that's where we're starting with this stuff. And that's what makes sense to me is why not pick a piece of vocabulary that Charlie Parker actually wrote as a part of this tune? That seems to me to be a very appropriate way of deciding which vocabulary we want to use. Okay, so this piece of vocabulary is seemingly really, really simple. Some of you may not have trouble with this, but what I urge you to do is if you hear it and you understand what it is and you go, oh, that's like super easy. I could do that in my sleep. Go ahead and try it because you might surprise yourself in terms of like, oh, I thought this was going to be really simple, but I wasn't aware that I actually couldn't do this. So don't write it off right away. So if we look at measure 7 of the melody, the first 3 beats, we see a really simple statement from Bird. He plays on an A flat major 7 chord. He plays 3, 5, 7, 9, 1. And that's just such a nice, perfect piece of vocabulary for us. And I should also say that I didn't mention on the last one, if you don't know the melody to this song, learn it. That's a really important thing since we're mining it for vocabulary. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take that really, really simple pattern. The rhythm is just simply 5 notes, 1 and 2 and 3. Okay, and it's 3, 5, 7, 9, 1. Now, here is the thing you've got to follow the chord symbol. And that will determine, well, really all the notes, but especially the 9, right? So there are some chords in this tune that have flat 9s. Make sure you observe that. Make sure you observe that flat 9 and actually use it. So if we were to do the first couple of bars here, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, we get a really, really good sense of the chord progression just by playing that same piece of repeated vocabulary over all of those chord changes. And that's what we're after here. Okay, so now if we were to go down to like the second half of the tune and we were to do something like play measure 17, we would hear something a little bit different because now we're starting to deal with we have a chord in there that is going to give us a flat 9, right? So if we go jump down there, we would have See, and that's the part of the tune where this pattern gets really, really interesting because we start to hear some of those flat nines. We have a minor seven flat five as we're modulating to the key of that relative minor. And it becomes really interesting and it sort of tests your skills a little bit, right? Okay, now what should we do if we have two chords in a measure with this piece of vocabulary? Well, we're just going to take one note off of it. So we're just going to simply play 3, 5, 7, 9 and then move on to the next chord. So a perfect example of that is the last four bars where we have like a 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. We would simply just play. And then we would go back to the top. So it's great. It's actually still a pattern that works when we have two chords per bar if we just alter it just a tiny little bit to make sure that it fits. Okay. All right. So this is really going to test you. Can you play the third of each chord instead of the root? We've done episodes on what I like to call rootitis. This is really going to tell you if you have rootitis because you're going to have to go through and you're going to have to quickly on the fly identify the third of each chord and then arpeggiate up from that third all the way to the nine. It will also test you a bunch on your knowledge of the ninth, which is a really, really great extension, right? We love to play nines, and that could be a really, really sweet note, depending on the context. So it's also going to test you on that. Hey, I know I can arpeggiate everything from the root, but can I arpeggiate from the third and continue it up to that first extension, which is the ninth? So I will have a demonstration track for all the Patreon members, along with a couple new trading tracks for all of you. And we'll kind of go from there. We'll pick one more next week, and then we'll figure out what we want to do after that. Okay. Love the feedback. Let me know if you're enjoying this stuff and sort of what it's doing for you. I always love to hear like that these episodes are actually getting into your practice time and what you're doing with them and the successes and the failures and hopefully I can help you. So I did mention Patreon. That's how this podcast gets funded. We don't do any ads on the show. Instead, we just rely on small monthly donations from listeners just like you. You get all of that stuff that I just mentioned. So you get that demonstration track to play along with. You also get some trading tracks for Donna Lee. And there's materials with every single episode that we've ever done as soon as you sign up to support the show. So if you want a little bit more information on that, simply go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. Thank you to everybody that's supporting us. And thank you to our new patron this week, CG. Thanks so much for signing up to support the podcast. And of course, to the over 350 members we have over there. Thanks. We really couldn't do this without you, and your support means the world to this show. So if you like what we're doing here and you're not supporting us, consider doing that. If you want to see this podcast keep going. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye.